let's get down to business. Thank you very much. Essentially there, I was providing some stimuli for you from an experimental context. One of the major ways in which we look at the effects of music is to look at the effects of music listening. And as you were listening to me there was a whole range of psychological and physiological effects. You maybe recognise some of the fragments of melodies that I was playing. You might have been thinking, what's going on here? I didn't expect somebody to be playing the saxophone. I see some friendly faces in the audience, so one or two of you might be thinking, that's Raymond playing his saxophone again. I hope he doesn't start singing. But there's a whole host of ways in which music affects us when we listen to music. And I would like to suggest, for the purposes of my talk, that what we had there was an independent variable. The music acted as an independent variable, and your responses in some respects were dependent variables. Also, before I go on, I would like to acknowledge my collaborators on this project. Nothing of what I say today is my own work. I've actually collaborated on all the projects that I'm presenting to you, and all my ideas are developed through collaborations. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Laura Mitchell, Maria Portolacchi, Julie de Simone, Tara French, and Jill Morgan. And what I would like to do is to give an overview of some key issues around methodologies, around researching music, and then present some detail from some of the studies that I've been involved in. But if you think of that first section as presenting some data around listening to music, another aspect of music is performing music. So what I would also like to do now is enter some more data into our discussion and invite us all to get involved in participating in music. So I'm going to give you 3 particular signs. When I hold my hand out like this, when my finger touches my palm, could everybody sing a long note? Any long note you want, it's not important, but I would like everybody to sing a long note. If I clench my fist like that, then that's a short note. When my finger touches my knuckle, then sing any short note you want. If I push my finger right here, that's a long note, but it signals there's going to be another long note to follow. If my finger moves up, then that's a higher note than the first one, and a higher note again. If my finger moves down, it's lower note. So that's relative pitch. And what we're going to do here is we're going to form a choir, the Royal Society of Medicine's improvising choir. And this is our first performance. But also think about it as introducing more data for us to discuss in the context of the talk. So we've got long notes, short notes, and relative pitch. Okay, so here we go. And you wait till my finger touches my hand before you start singing. spend the rest of my talk just analysing what happened there. There was, agreement around some sort of tonality, the spontaneous melodies that were happening. I found really enjoyable to listen to. I would pay money to hear that. No, and essentially now what we've done here is, in the past 5 minutes, we've listened to some music and you've performed some music. And essentially, that's what we're engaging with today. That is the totality of musical experience. We listen to music and we participate in music. However, there is such a vast array of responses, a vast array of ways in which we engage with music, and that's one of the reasons why we're here today, to look at the different methodologies, the different effects that we can expect from music. But there is no doubt that we are all musical, that every human being has a biological and social guarantee of musicianship. And that's not a vague utopian ideal anymore. Those two examples, I think, provide some evidence to support that. Also, before I move on, I'd like you to meet my friend, Bing Bong. Some of you might recognise Bing Bong as the imaginary friend of Riley, the major protagonist in the Disney Pixar film Inside Out. I went to see the film Inside Out with my 11-year-old daughter, and I found it a profoundly moving experience. It actually is a wonderful, wonderful film about a young girl's, she has an existential crisis in the film. But for me, for the purposes of this talk, there's a key role that music plays. Music is not just a soundtrack in the film. At certain points in the film, music plays a key role in explaining the character development and the personality of Riley. At one point in the film, when Riley's in the depth of depression, one of her traits, joy, inside her head, is lost inside her unconscious in what's called the memory dump. And joy and Bing Bong are stranded in the memory dump as a way of signifying Riley's deep depression. And this is Joy and Bing Bong in the memory dump, trying to get out of the memory dump. They're trapped in the memory dump, and they get out of the memory dump by using a space rocket. And the space rocket is powered by song. And the more passionately they sing, the louder they sing, the more they sing, the more gusto, the faster the rocket goes. And there's a 10-minute sequence in the film where they try to get out of the memory dump, the unconscious, and return to conscious, return joy, Riley's trait joy, to headquarters. Mm-hmm. But the key point is music is the vehicle that's used to provide this transition between the unconscious and the conscious. And I don't think there's any accident that it's music that is the most important bit. Music that provides the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. Music that is so crucially wrapped up in Riley's identity. So, another example of the universal power of music, the universal effects of music, and an acknowledgement that we are all musical. So why? So if you think of, that was a sort of very general introduction. I'd like to drill down in a little bit more detail about why music. Why has there been such growth of interest around the effects of music, such an explosion of interest around the relationship between music, health, and well-being? So music is ubiquitous, regardless of which particular society you want to visit in current day or which society you want to look at historically speaking. Music is ubiquitous and exists to provide a variety of artistic, social, creative, medical, religious functions in all societies. Music is emotional. One of the primary reasons for listening to music is for emotional regulation, to be moved, to affect our moods. When you decide what music to listen to, whether that's in your house, in the kitchen, whether that's on your iPod when you're travelling the bus, whether that's when you have friends coming round to your house, you make a number of very sophisticated and highly nuanced psychological assessments about how do I feel right now? How do I want to feel in 10 minutes? How do I want to feel in an hour? Is there anybody else listening to my music? Do I want to change the mood of the room? Do I want to enhance the mood of the room? We make these psychological assessments very quickly and very efficiently, and we're able to select music for exactly those purposes. And very often we do that unconsciously. So music is emotional, it's engaging. Many of the talks today are going to discuss the way in which music engages us neurologically, socially, cognitively. Music is distracting, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. When we listen to music, when we're playing music, we can be distracted, we can be removed from things that we don't want to think about or things that we need to disengage with. Music is physical, so when we're involved in, when we're involved in percussion, or playing the guitar, or playing the piano, we're involved in motor coordination. Even singing, when we were all singing there together, there was significant amounts of motor coordination involved in singing. Music is ambiguous, and I think that's a key point around music too, that regardless of what intention a composer wishes to imbue a piece of music with, and regardless of what emotion a performer wishes to convey when they play music, when we listen to music, we filter it through our own experiences and our own history. So when I was playing music to you at the start, you would all have had different responses to what I was playing. Some of you might have recognised the music, some of you may have been responding to the structural features of the music, but music is, I'm suggesting to you by definition, ambiguous, and that is one of the reasons why it is potentially such an important vehicle for producing benefits for health. Music is social, it's communicative, and one of its primary functions is in communicating. Music affects our behaviour. There's no doubt about that as well. There's a whole host of psychological effects to show how music affects our behaviour. And music plays a key role in our identity. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail as well. But these are some of the primary reasons why I think music is implicated in such a wide variety of interventions focusing on health and well-being. But how do we engage methodologically in understanding the process and outcomes of music interventions? And these are some of the methodological issues that I'd like to discuss today. So first of all, we have to think of what's the nature of the music intervention. I'm dividing them broadly into music listening and musical participation. So music listening in terms of the effects of music listening in lots of different contexts: clinical context, informal context, everyday context, and musical participation, emphasising once again the ubiquitous and universal potential that we have for musical communication. And that's a very important and fundamental question as well. So we look at the types of interventions that we have. What sort of approaches do we want to take when we're involved in carrying out research? And the broad distinction that I'm making here is qualitative approaches versus quantitative approaches. And I'll go into some detail about the way in which qualitative research is designed and the way in which quantitative research is designed. But what I'll do is I'll do that by presenting some examples from my own work. We've also got to think about, are we interested in the outcomes of music interventions? So, do your levels of anxiety reduce when you listen to music? Does your musical skills increase when you play music? Can you reduce pain perception by listening to music? So the outcome measures, what sort of outcome measures are we interested in? But it's also very important to look at the process. What happened when I was conducting you through your singing there? How did we start to agree on a particular tonality? What levels of volume and what levels of pitch? What is the relationship between the room and the acoustics in the room and the way in which the music was produced? There's a whole host of process variables that are really important to look at when we're looking at the effects of music as well. And these issues are all crucially influenced by the research questions that we set ourselves. Are we interested in the processes? Are we interested in the outcomes? Are we interested in the neurological responses? Are we interested in the social context in which music is functioning? So music is so inextricably linked to our sense of self, to our social and cultural milieu in which we're living, that it makes it, the very fact that it is such a potentially powerful intervention also makes it a very complex and difficult intervention to get to grips with. And I think some of those issues were touched upon at the opening talk. So, of course, evidence-based practice is a fundamental concern for those of us involved in this type of intervention. But because music is so complex, because we all care about music, because music is so universal, then it is definitely a complex intervention. And the Medical Research Council have guidelines for how to carry out research involving complex interventions. And the primary definition of a complex intervention is interventions that contain several interacting components. And there is absolutely no doubt that music is a complex intervention. So at that point, if you're looking for particular guidelines about how to design a research project involving music, I think the MRC's guidelines for complex interventions is definitely a starting point. I'm not going to go into, it's very technical, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the technicalities involved, but I'm just going to highlight some of the resources that can be used when thinking about evaluating evidence, when thinking about designing your own study. Also, the Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine gives a great amount of detail about levels of evidence. So what is the relationship between a randomised controlled trial and a pilot study? What's the difference between carrying out 5 or 6 interviews with participants who take part in percussion workshops and a study involving 4,000 people involved in playing the piano? There's various different levels of evidence that must be taken into consideration. Also, the Cochrane database for systematic reviews, if you like, is a gold standard for published literature, and there's part of the Cochrane database is concerned with music interventions. And I think, as was pointed out at the start, we're faced with a paradox, because one of the paradoxes is there's been a huge explosion of interest around the use of music for therapeutic purposes. The relationship to music, health and well-being is being investigated globally from so many different perspectives, yet not so many studies find their way into the Cochrane database. And at this point, I'm going to quote Tony Wigram and Christian Gould's chapter in a book titled Music, Health and Wellbeing that I co-edited, called The Religion of Evidence-Based Practice, because there is a tension. At the one hand, we want to be rigorous, we want to be comprehensive and robust and transparent in our research methodologies, we want to carry out research to the highest possible standard, yet music is a very difficult intervention to adhere to these types of criteria. And Tony Wigram and Christian Gould make the point that if we ruthlessly and what they say is this sort of single-handedly, determinedly focus on these narrow parameters, then we run the risk of losing certain aspects of what the musical intervention is all about. And it's very important to take to look holistic. So that's why I put Bing Bong back on this slide, because at the one hand we want to be as systematic and as rigorous as possible, but at the same time we want to allow music to be experienced in the richness in which it can be experienced, because that's one of the ways in which music can have its effect. So there's a tension within the literature. So if I go into a little bit more detail about how is the relationship between music and health assessed, I think of qualitative methods, quantitative methods, physiological and neurological measures, observations of behaviour, assessments of task performance, self-report, questionnaires, the use of rating scales. There's a huge variety of quantitative ways in which we can research the effects of music. We can also research the process and outcomes of music qualitatively by focus groups, interviews, looking at real-time interactions, anthropological studies, musical ethnography, newspaper articles, web-based resources. So there is now a vast array of methods that are open to researchers looking at investigating the process and outcomes of music interventions. And the relationship between the outcome measures assessed by these various techniques of music are complex, and developing causal links is a key challenge for the area. You might want to say that's one of the reasons that we're here today, is to look at ways in which we can investigate the causal links. And this brings us back to the notion of evidence-based practice, but I would suggest thinking about evidence in the broadest possible sense. What is evidence and what is the nature of evidence? So what I would like to do now is do a kind of whistle-stop tour of some of the research that I've been involved in and try and map that research onto these broader issues, and at the same time holding on to what we did right at the very start when thinking about the listening that was involved when I was playing the saxophone, and also the singing that we engaged in as well. And once again, it's a sweeping generalisation, but to some extent, music is either listening to music or performing music. What we did at the start is a very brief snapshot of what we're involved in when we're playing music. So this particular study was involved with, and I've also tried to focus on projects that involve adults, older adults. This particular study involved access to musical activities for mental health inpatients at Gartnavel Royal Hospital in Glasgow, working with adolescents, adult care of the elderly wards, and residential nursing homes for patients with dementia. So it's a music intervention that uses music therapy and community music, and gives people at the hospital access to all different types of music interventions. But we're particularly interested in the care of the elderly project, and in this project the activities are tailored to include a range of interests, abilities and needs, composition, improvisation, singing, listening to live and recorded music. It's a combination of music listening and musical participation. I'm just going to show you one part of the results. This is a quantitative part of the results where we looked at the effects of the music intervention upon cognitive functioning, and we quantified cognitive functioning using the mini mental state questionnaire. So from a research methodology point of view, we focused on discrete independent variables and looked at the effects of the music intervention on these particular independent variables. And what we found was that in an experimental group that took part in the music sessions, there was an increase in these patients with dementia. There was an increase in cognitive abilities in comparison to a control group whose cognitive functions deteriorated slightly. So thinking about the relationship between the independent variable, the music, and the dependent variable, as we've defined it here at the cognitive functioning, we have a significant interaction effect. However, there's a number of confounds here, and this is where we start to meet problems. The sample size was very small. There was only 12 participants. Because of the nature of the intervention, because of the nature of the funding, it was a PhD project. So the sample size was very small, and you'll also notice that in the pre-test condition, there are significant differences between the experimental group and the control group as well. So there is the chance that those participants because allocation to the control group and the experimental group was not random, it couldn't be done randomly, so there was some discussion with the nurses about who would be appropriate to take part in the music interventions. So there's a chance that these aspects of the methodological design introduced a confounding variable into the system. So we have some suggestive evidence for the benefits of music intervention, but there's a number of confounds that mean that we can't, using the evidence-based criteria, using the gold standard criteria, we can't be sure that the relationship between the music and the outcome measures is essentially causal. But these studies...
You're right.
Sorry?
You are right.
I'm over now. Okay. Right. So what I'll then do is, I'll present a little bit of qualitative data, just to, and then stop in a minute. Okay. So Yeah, so this particular study was a qualitative study of the psychological processes involved in music therapy sessions with cancer patients. And this study, so rather than quantifying the variables in a very precise way, looking at outcome measures, we were interested in the process involved in the music therapy interventions, how the participants engaged with music and what they felt and what they how they experienced the music. And this is another fundamental point, that talking about music is an important part of the musical communication process. Talking about music is not just describing the musical communication process, it actually creates the musical communication process. How we talk about music affects how we listen to music, and it affects how we perform music. So I'll just finish by giving you one example here. Free expression and communicating through music. It's not like I was speaking to the person, it's just you're getting involved, you know, through the music. It's not like sitting and trying to make a conversation. Yes, we can all communicate at the same time by playing an instrument, whereas if you're verbally communicating, you can't all talk at the same time. But we can all play a tune, we can all be heard at the same time. And if you hear someone, you can pick up on their rhythm, you can join in, maybe pick up with someone else and join in with them. So everybody's playing a tune, everybody's communicating, and you can pick, you know, certain tunes or sounds, rhythms, if you like, and join in with the person. So here, there's a fundamental distinction between communicating through music and communicating through language. An acknowledgement that we can all make music together, an acknowledgement that musical communication is essentially ambiguous, but the importance of free expression, communicating through music. And these participants had no previous musical experience as well. So with this type of methodology, we're allowing the participants to tell us what they feel is important about the intervention. We're not predetermining a particular outcome that we're interested in. We're not saying, I'm interested in cognitive skills as quantified by this questionnaire. I'm interested in your ability of playing music as quantified by my test. What we're saying is, I want to give you the chance to tell me what you think is important about the intervention, and we're able to analyse, and once again I stress robustly and transparently, because there are very clear guidelines about how to engage with qualitative methods. So, just in summary then, where am I going? I started off by presenting some music to listen to, and we also engaged in performing music. I made the case that essentially that's what we're interested in when we look at the effects of music listening, music performance, and talking about music. I pointed towards some key resources that can be used when developing research interventions, the Cochrane collaboration and the MRC's guidelines for complex interventions, and made the point that music is universal, that we can all communicate through music, but that presents a challenge because it's such a complex intervention. It creates a challenge about how we engage methodologically. And I then presented a couple of examples of how we can translate these challenges and these questions into particular research methodologies. So apologies for running over, but